So today's topic is risk assessment with a main focus on high risk, which is one of the most important, and I'll explain why. One of the most commonly asked questions we receive from our clients is, what is the best way to mitigate high risk to keep us safe? So I'll share with you why is this such a hot topic amongst professionals, some typologies, some examples, and best practices on how to stay safe. You may ask, where does risk management start? So I'll give you a quick overview of a tone from the top. An entity's risk appetite is set annually by the board of directors to align risk-taking with the business requirements. The board of directors and the CEO have a key role in implementing the risk appetite. They also monitor adherence to the regulator, if regulated, and make necessary changes to the operation and the risk profile. The objective is to understand the entity's risk-bearing capacity, the risk appetite, the risk limits, and risk profile. When I've asked in return, have you ever wondered why this is so important? The most common answer I hear is because of the regulators. You may then ask, what could happen if we were to ignore your advice? Well, the regulator can enforce punishments for acts like willful blindness, aiding and abetting, etc. And senior management and compliance officers can be exposed to large fines of up to 400,000 euros, and in some cases, prison. So then normally I expect a response like, okay, you've got our attention. How can we apply this in a practical sense? So it's very important to firstly eliminate prohibited business, which are the shell banks, shell companies, bearer shares, sanctioned SDN targets, local secondary sanctions list, and blacklisted countries. In addition, they're the global standards, which are set by FATF. However, I'm based in the EU, so I'll use the 6 AMLD as an example. The EU 6 AMLD directives define 22 predicate offences, the basic crime that generates the funds that then need to be laundered. So I believe a good strategy would be to adopt a zero tolerance to interact or to be related to in any way to the 22 predicate offences. I strongly recommend looking at the EU website. Just type in for the search the EU 6 AMLD 22 predicate offences, because you need to remember that these are prohibited within your organisation. The directive is applied to a wide range of entities, including virtual asset service providers. It's really important to watch the criminal behaviour during onboarding, ongoing customer due diligence, and transaction monitoring. In addition, I'll share some of the transaction monitoring related predicate offences. Certainly not all of them. So I've selected the most common types that we see on blockchain monitoring and investigations. I'll open with Ponzi schemes, a form of fraud in which a belief in the success of non-existent enterprise is fostered by the payment of quick returns to the first investors from money invested by later investors. An example is a Jetcoin, one to look at. The offence is fraud, insider trading, and market manipulation. The AML action is forbidden. Next is ransomware, a type of malicious software for crypto virology that threatens to publish the victim's data or perpetually block access to it unless the ransom is paid. An example is WannaCry. The offence is cybercrime, is forbidden. Next is terrorist organisations, an organisation involved in the terrorism of related activity. For example, ISIS. The offence is terrorism. This is forbidden. And then there's theft. Recipient of stolen funds. An example is the stolen Coin Secure Fund. The offence is robbery and theft, trafficking in stolen goods. The action is forbidden. A severe risk factor is the OFAC sanctioned entity, an entity sanctioned by the Office of Foreign Asset Control. The offence approving transactions with targeted foreign countries or its citizens, such as Russia, Iran, North Korea, which bring a risk to national security. The AML action is forbidden. And then there's the dark market types, centralized and decentralized. Dark forums like A-Tour only. Accessible online discussion forum. An example is the DNM Avengers. The offence is illicit trafficking in narcotics and psychotropic substances, illegal arms trafficking, trafficking in stolen goods. AML action is forbidden. And then there's the dark vendor shops and dark services, illicit services, including hacking, wallets, and web hosting services. An example is PIN pays. The offence is fraud and cybercrime. AML action is forbidden. So I'm sure you would agree, money laundering is a serious crime and it undermines the integrity of the financial system and enables other criminal activities to thrive. So now that I've highlighted the prohibited business, we can now move on and I'll share with you the high-risk business. And I'll start with the identification of inherent and residual risk. The inherent risk is defined as the pre-existing money laundering related risk to the products and services, the known risks. Residual risk is defined as the money laundering related risks that remain after the mitigation of specific risk factors. I'll break this into two steps. Firstly, a business-based risk assessment, its products, services, and delivery channels, the jurisdiction in which the company operates, and the new developing technologies, and also third-party vendors, and also APIs. Secondly, the relationship-based risk assessment on products and services and delivery channels used by the customer, the jurisdiction in which the customer operates or do business, and the customer activities and their transaction patterns. Risk ratings are described by calculating the average of the risk score for each category. I'll share with you an experience to explain further. The company I was with or working for facilitated in the exchange of virtual currency for individuals and legal entities. It's a bold statement from me, however, I feel comfortable to say it, that a virtual currency exchange can be known as a method used traditionally to disguise the proceeds of crime and is considered inherently as a high risk for money laundering. Because virtual currency exchanges can be used in the placement and layering stages of money laundering. Virtual currency-based transactions provide an enhanced level of anonymity below record keeping and reporting threshold amounts. Hence, it is frequently used in the commission of the previously mentioned, the predicate offences such as the drug trafficking and arms smuggling. The company in question applied a customized business model to mitigate their risks. And I'll briefly explain it. So 50% of the customers were buying virtual currency using fiat, which was deposited via SEPA and SWIFT transfers. That enabled the company to see that the funds belonged to the particular customer, and it also made the audit trail visible. The company followed customer identification, monitoring and reporting standards, which are set by the regulator, to ensure its products and services will not be used to launder money or fund terrorism, and to help mitigate operational, financial and reputational risks. The other 50% were virtual currency deposits, and the transactions were checked by, let's say, AMLBot, the type of solution that can make sure it does not include any illicit funds, which then enables the AML team to identify the fund's legitimacy. Customers could deposit a certain amount of money in currency or coin that the company supported to their account and consequently use the balance to trade and then withdraw as currency or coin. So also at the start of that relationship, a questionnaire established a risk rating. The category was high, medium or low. I'll walk you through a customer risk rating, a system that could typically calculate a risk score, offering, let's say, 10 questions to determine the customer's risk, such as, are you a PEP? Yes or no? And then maybe 6 questions to determine the geographical risk, such as the citizenship and residency. And then the transaction risk rating, listing the products and channels available. Crypto is always a high score by default. And then the transaction profiling, expected monthly credit and debit amount, expected monthly and credit debit count. So How much and how many transactions? One of the key takeaways that you should remember is the definition of high risk. So let me break it down for you for clarity. The risk is likely to happen. They're unacceptable risks unless appropriately mitigated with the controls in place. And any issues have been rectified and signed off by the compliance officer. I'll tap in a bit further. For example, the corporate accounts can be high risk based on a monthly transaction threshold. So low would be €1 to 250,000, medium 250,000 to 800,000, high would be 8,000 and up. And then we'd have the high risk industries, customer occupation or nature of principal business. The company should maintain a list of industries and business types that are considered to be a high risk, as well as restricted business types with whom we will not establish a business relationship with. That is employed in a high risk or restricted industry. If the client's industry does not appear on the following list I'm just about to mention, then the client's occupation could be considered as a low risk. So I'll start with money service business, money transmitters, payment services, online gaming and fantasy sports websites, import and export companies, precious metals and stone deliveries, construction industry, cash incentive businesses, restaurants, etc., jewelry wholesalers, high-value art dealers, luxury vehicle industry, cars, boats and motorcycles, etc., charity and non-profit organizations, oil and gas industry, and the weapons industry. And then we go for jurisdictional risk, the geography of the customer's transactions. The company bases its jurisdictional risk assessment on the country risk assessment prepared by United Nations or European Union or a national government, and assesses the geographical risk of each client according to the risk that has been assigned to the country that the client transacts with. And a risk calculator contains the country's risk rating and a methodology for determining the risk rating. The company will not maintain a relationship with clients that reside or sends funds to countries that have been designated through a ministerial directive. Countries that are targeted by the EU or UN and national sanctions have been identified as high risk by the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. Suspicious transaction filing. Upon filing a suspicious transaction report on a client, management will review the client's historical events to determine whether the client should return and maintain a relationship. However, the company will keep a record documenting the rationale for this decision. Managing high-risk customers, like politically exposed persons, and high-risk transactions are identified and will require EDD, enhanced due diligence. In cases where high risks are identified, additional information is required. All high-risk relationships will need to be approved by the compliance officer before onboarding. Predefined questions to satisfy the suspicion are required to continue. Requests for further information and cooperation from the customer is required. So the customer could be a PEP, a politically exposed person. The customer exceeds their monthly limits. Transactions with a high-risk jurisdiction, high-risk occupation, or operates in a high-risk industry. Complex ownership structures. An incoming inquiry from a law enforcement. And information for SARS filing. And then I move on to transaction monitoring. Real-time processing of crypto transactions that generates alerts for suspicious transactions is vital. A transaction from or to a high-risk address. What steps can be done to implement this? AMLBot tool software supports continuous monitoring of the transactions to detect anomalies and suspicious trends in customer activities and promptly flag them. The power of the alert allows time for the compliance team to focus on genuine suspicious warnings. Specific red flags that are associated with virtual currency transactions, for example, a customer conducts transactions with cryptocurrency addresses that have been linked to the dark net marketplaces or other illicit activities. A customer's cryptocurrency address appears on a public forum associated with illegal activity. A customer's transactions are initiated from an IP address associated with Tor. So can you think of any examples where this applies? AMLBot indicates that the wallet transferring cryptocurrency to the exchange has a suspicious source or suspicious source of funds, such as a dark net marketplace. So how does that fit into the bigger picture? If during online or offline transaction monitoring, suspicious activity patterns are identified, an internal investigation must be initiated. In the case of transactions being sent, the transaction is stopped. The result of the investigations are sent to the MLRO, within the name of which suspicious activity has been identified. So you may ask, but what role does that play in everyday decisions? The short answer is escalation of suspicious activity. The MLRO is responsible for submitting suspicious activity reports. All countries have different thresholds. Lithuania is within 3 hours, Estonia is within 48 hours. And this is taken from after the internal investigation confirms that a customer's activity is suspicious. A SAR is then prepared per regulation requirements provided by the FIU in question. And it's key to remember that it's a criminal offence for anyone working in the company following an investigation of a SAR to do or say anything that might tip off to the customer that a disclosure has been made, which can also carry punishment. There's a case that I'm aware of where the customer disclosed to the criminal, and then the criminal also disclosed that this information was shared by the customer service representative. So if a sale has been filed, careful steps must be taken in communicating with the customer, and additional advice taken from the MLRO is really important to not accidentally disclose to the customer. I'll leave you with a question. How did this change the way you look at high risks? And that concludes today's AML stream. Thanks for listening. And remember, by harnessing the power of AMLBot, you can experience the highest quality blockchain insights with the best data, which is also affordable.